All right, this one has been a long time coming because I bought these cams. I think I might have received them last December or maybe January, so I've had them for like 8 or 9 months. But these are cams for the double overhead cam NC250 engine or the FSE300R. So I've never actually opened this engine up yet, other than oil changes. I think I've got about 2,000 miles on it. Everything's been working fine, running fine, and I bought the cams because I like the bike. I didn't install the cams yet because the bike just works. The engine just works. So anyway, gonna take my gas tank off here and see if I can even get to the cams inside the frame. I think I can, but I do know it's a tight fit, so it is possible I might have to loosen my lower mount bolts and like drop the engine down just slightly. I've heard of some issues trying to get to things in here, and I've never popped the top open on one of these. I've done the single overhead cam to check valves. So I did look up and I found an semi-manual-ish, and like it has the cylinder head, which not the best drawings or anything and not the best instructions, but it's something. And it goes through removal of the cylinder head, checking my valve shims, checking the camshafts, and then reinstall. And there is some that I'll have to put together myself here, but it all in all shouldn't be too hard. Basically the gist of this is open my engine, pop the top off, pop off the old cam, or I'm going to check my valves, my valve clearance before I remove the old cams, just because I'm curious. I've never checked it on this engine. And then put the new cams in, recheck my valves. If everything looks good, button it up and go test ride it later this week. The only thing I think I might need is valve shims, and we will see. Like I said, I think I got about 2,000 hours on here. I'll check it before I finish out this video just to make sure of where I'm at, because I'm kind of curious of that with these valves. I've never actually, again, have not opened this engine other than, oh, I did change the clutch pack because I wanted a different one, not because there was any issues, because I wanted a different feel. But yeah, it's just been stock engine entirely, but I'm excited to see what these cams feel like. And with the gas tank off, much easier to see what I'm working with here. So I'm used to the bottom end because it's the same bottom end that was on the single overhead cam. So we have cover here, cover right here for our timing marks, and to spin the crank around to get it to top dead center. And I believe it's just the 4 Allen head bolts up here to get the cap off. I've never actually removed my spark plug from this bike yet because, as you can see, spark plug sits right under this frame cross member. I do have the plug adapter that should be able to get down there, but it's just a not easy place to get to. And if you look at this valve cap, you have these engine braces right here. I might have to remove those to lift this up and get it off. We'll see if I can pivot it forward or whatnot. But it'll be a little bit of work here. See what we can do and figure out. Alright, just because I have seen this come up before, spark plug is a 16 millimeter, what did I see, a CR8 or EIX. It's a CR8. But you need this one that kind of like skirts around a little bit, and then a 3-inch extension to fit in there all the way. The 3-inch extension comes out to about right there, and you can just barely get a socket in there to get it loosened. And then I did have to turn it by hand for most of the way to get it out, but able to get the spark plug out. You do have to take the gas tank off to get to this, and you will need special tools. But this is the OEM CR8EI. It's a torch plug, so I'm going to put an NGK in there, but really looks fine. Don't see any issues. Didn't feel anything with the plug, and that's why I haven't really swapped anything out, but I'll throw an NGK in here just for good measure. Alright, this is where I gotta stop and rethink things and figure out the simplest way to do this, because right now the only option I'm seeing is to undo my engine mount bolts and drop the engine down about 1 inch in the frame, because this bolt right here, because that's part of the frame, and I need a very, very small 5mm Allen in order to get in there. So I might gonna check at the hardware stores, see what is around, but I didn't actually loosen any of the other ones yet, just because, you know, and they're on there pretty good. So that's pretty tight with this thing. If I get this in there, it's gonna be a bitch to get out. So I wanna make sure I have something with a little bit of leverage. And I would prefer to use a socket Allen, where I just have better leverage here. So let's hold back and figure this out. And interestingly, my throttle cable, the way it sits on here, rubs lightly against the engine. Not hurting anything, but just something I noticed. Anyway, let's figure this out. And not to be defeated by that middle bolt, I got it out without taking off my engine mount bolts. So everything's still fully mounted in the frame. I did end up cutting a 5mm Allen and then using a crescent wrench. So it's gonna be fun to get that back in there. We're totally gonna torque that to spec, but honestly these shouldn't really be that torqued down just because they're head bolts going into rubber gaskets. So yeah. Anyway, got the hard bolt out. Now it's time to get the other 5 out and pop my top off. All right, got all my cylinder head bolts out, but now, and I thought this might be a problem, is I can't actually get this cover off, and no matter how I pivot it and try to pull it out of here, it just does not want to come out. It kind of gets hung up, but and there's inside my motor, so it does look like I am going to have to. It's just hanging up on things, and doesn't want to come out the other side either. It's even worse going out the other side. So I'm gonna have to at least loosen my engine mount bolts, maybe remove a few just so I can wiggle this around a little bit more to get this valve cover off. So it's a little bit of a process here, but we're working through it. We're learning. And I checked with some sources smarter than myself. Valve cover will not come off with the engine fully bolted into the bike. So I think I'm just going to loosen my intake up here. Make sure that can kind of move so it's not pulling on anything. I think there's enough slack in my fuel line where I can leave that connected. There's enough slack in that starter line so it can move a little bit, because I'm not dropping the engine all the way. I just want to move it down like so. Then I have to remove front mount bolt, 2 bottom ones, and then the engine should pivot down just slightly. And I'm probably only going to get about 1/2 inch, but hopefully 1/2 inch is enough, because if I can't get this without removing it from the bike, this ain't happening. I don't know. I don't know if it's happening right now. Maybe it will, because I'm already into it this much. But yeah, I have 3 mounting bolts for the engine that are left. My cooling hoses, I think they'll let me drop 1/2 inch. I don't need much space, just a little bit of space to get this thing off, just between here and here. So get these bolts loosened, lower this down, and see what we got. Dang it, I gotta take it back off the stand though, because I gotta take my skid plate off. All right, I'm getting tired. This is turning into way more of a project. So right now I have all my engine mount bolts out, my swing arms mostly out. This engine's just kind of sitting in here, and It's not really bolted down, so you can see it's dropped down in my hole about 1/2 inch, but I still cannot get this fucking valve cover off. Like, this might be one of those ones where you end up tearing down quite a bit. I'm gonna say it, I really do, really do like this bike, but valve checks will be a bitch. Holy shit, are the valve checks hard. On the older version of this engine, the single overhead cam, valve checks were an hour. If you spent 2 hours, you either did something wrong or you were just wasting a bunch of time. I have already spent 2 hours on this, and I'm not even to my valves to be able to check them yet. It really feels like this is more or less an engine out job, which I was trying to avoid doing, but here we are. The fun of learning with China bikes. Again, I still like this bike. I still really do like it, but I really dislike this part, this checking the valves. And if these valves are out of spec, I think I have like 2,000 miles on this bike, that'll be shitty, because if it's this hard to do, they should stay in spec for a very long time. That's just me. Well, we'll see as we get this open, if I ever get this open. All right, it was a long day yesterday, but I finally got this cam valve, or the valve cover, off. I did have to remove my right side radiator, which meant draining my coolant. I also had to remove this plug, and I had to remove the injector, because the valve cover comes off and it spins around and then it kind of tilts down. It's the only way I found out I can get it off with the engine in the frame like this, but I've got this out, so whew, geez, finally. Now it is time to put my engine top dead center, and let's see where my cams are for right now, because I got about, I think about 2,500 miles on this bike. Let's just see where it's at. I'm hoping they are well within spec, just because this is a good bit of work to get to these cams, so hopefully it's only something you have to do like every 4,000 to 5,000 miles. So anyway, let's get to it. Alright, so I thought my timing marks were a little messed up at first, but it doesn't look like anything's wrong here. So I have a timing mark there and right there. They line up right across the cylinder head. And you probably can't see it in there, but there's a timing mark. It actually has a, I think I saw a T, but there is a nice notch that goes across where you can see it. Now let's check some valve clearances and see what we got. There's some weird tolerances for these that they give in the manual, well, quote unquote manual that I found. I don't know how legit it is, but let's see what we got. All right, so this is the best document I could find on these as far as the valves. So intake 0.10 to 0.15 millimeters, exhaust 0.15 to 0.20. But they do have this maintenance limit, which I don't know what that means, if that's just like, hey, you're going to cause engine damage if you go past this limit, but you want to keep it in this limit. So anyway, as far as my valves, my exhaust are at 0.2 on both sides. My intake is 0.11 and 0.15. So 0.11, 0.15 is within my standards. 0.2 is within my standards for both of those. So my valves should be good. I just removed the automatic cam chain tensioner, so my cam chain is loose now. If you're curious on the cam chain tensioner, it's pretty darn simple. Just this spring going to this cap. On this side, if you press that little thing up, it will allow this plunger to go back in. So this spring really just pushes this plunger out and keeps the cam chain tight. Pretty simple setup. But everything's looking clean in here, looking good. Do make sure with this weight thing or whatever that that's kind of down, because that's how you get it top dead center. You can see the cam lobes are pointed up and out. If that's up, the cam lobes will be pointed in for you. So just keep that in mind. But so far so good. I think at this point I just need to remove my this holder here for my cam chain. Then I should be able to start getting these off, and I can take a look at my new cams over here and compare these two on the table. All right, and I got my cover off. So if anyone is curious about the valves, or the valve shims on these, I'll show you what they are. So you bring your bucket out, and then inside your bucket is a valve shim. So that one says it's the 308 in there. We'll put that one back in, but it's the bucket and shim are one and the same. But these are the OEM ones, and they're within spec, so really I'm just going to pull those out to note where they all are. Like that's a 308. We'll go through them all. And then hopefully we're back to starting to button this up. So have our OEM intake cam, our new intake cam from Joe Henner, OEM exhaust cam, new exhaust cam. I can't really tell the difference on these, but when we're talking about possibly thousands of inches or whatever, or like hundreds of millimeters, you know, I might not be able to see it. So, but yeah, check my valves, at least see where the shims are as far as noting those, so I have it. And then it's a matter of putting these new cams in, making sure my timing lines up with my timing chain, getting my cover or my clamps back on, get the chain tensioner back in. You see I push the plunger in on the chain tensioner, so that way you install it like this with no pressure on it, and then put in the spring with this bolt, and it will automatically push in to tighten the chain. And then it's a matter of putting my bike back together, which is going to be a few hours. This is definitely a process. Do not undertake this if you're weary of doing mechanical work. All right, now we're cooking with gasoline. We're moving through this. Got the new cams in. It was a little finagling to make sure my timing marks lined up properly. Everything with the flywheel stayed as it was. Once I set that at top dead center, just left it and it stuck there nice and good. It was just tricky getting the cam chain lined back up with the right sprockets. New cams are back in. Tightened all these cam bolts down to 10 Newton meters, which is the closest I could find to some specs in the manual. There's some assembly lube in there with the new cams. So I think at this point, putting my cam chain tensioner should tighten this bad boy up. Then I'm going to spin the engine around a few times, recheck my valves just to make sure. I did already check the valves again with the valve clearances again with the new cams in, and they're identical to what they were before. No changes at all, so that's good. If you ever do this swap, you shouldn't have to touch your valve shims unless they're already out of spec. So yeah, let me cam chain tensioner in, spin the engine a few times, recheck the valves, start buttoning this engine back up finally, and start getting this stuff back together, because this bike is a mess right now. It is all tore up. All right, this is why we double check things. So I put the new cams in, tightened things up, went to go spin the engine around, and it wasn't liking to spin. Like something was hanging up in the cam chain area. So I had to take it all back apart here, which really isn't that hard. It's just the 8 bolts up here, and you pull this off, rearrange things, got it back in there. Then I was able to spin my motor around a few times, and everything was feeling normal, and it's still timing lines matched up right there and there, and I got the little timing thing down the front, but I've already closed that hole off. I have my chain tensioner back in, so really it's putting my gasket back on, getting that valve cover back on, and buttoning this thing up, and then seeing if it runs again. I don't know. We're gonna see. Yeah, but I think the hard part's done. Well, I say that, but I think I worked through all the hard parts where it's gonna be easy parts now. So yeah, let's get that valve cover back on, get the engine back up in the frame because it's not even mounted in the frame right now, and get my swing arm bolt back in so I can actually set the bike down or move it. I hate having a bike up on a stand that I can't really take off the stand. All right, I want to record putting this valve cover back on because this was the hard part of this. So obviously, side with the big part, that's going to go on the other side. So what you want to do is turn it this way, So I have this engine lowered in here, blah, blah, blah. And so notice I'm perpendicular basically to the chassis. And it just kind of wiggles up, wiggles around. Bada boom. That's it. But you notice the way I wiggled around, that's going to go right over where my injector hole is. So that's why the injector's got to come out. The way it tilted down, it's going to go right over these radiator hoses. So they're going to have to come out. And right up here, I was having trouble. You might be able to get away with just removing the fan, but in my mind I was like, you know what, if I had to drain the coolant, might as well just take the radiator off, because there's not really much more to it. So, and then dropping the engine bolts as well, so the engine can drop out. Once you do all those things, you should be able to get that valve cover off without taking the engine out of the chassis. Woohoo! And we're basically done. Tell you what, it goes back together a lot faster than it comes apart when you're like just trying to get to like one piece, but you're just taking off random stuff to get to it. As you put it back together, you're like, oh yeah, let's do that and that. But I think I have everything tightened back up. Everything's back on the engine. I did a few kicks of the engine like this. I did want to mention at the start of this, I made up a little 5mm tool to get off one of these valve cover bolts. Just FYI, once you loosen the bolts and take off the coolant and move everything around, you can actually get an Allen wrench, just a normal 90-degree Allen wrench in there. So you don't have to use something like this, or you don't have to make something like this. So just FYI, I'm going to keep this around, like that little piece of 5mm, just in case, because I think it's helpful. But yeah, really, right now I am going to take a small break, get some food, make sure I come back to this with a clean mind and everything, just because I want to double check everything. A lot of this stuff I always feel like tightening torque on these engine brace bolts. Hey, let's make sure to get those now, and let's get that all set. Tightening torque on my engine mount bolts, let's get those all set, and let's make sure that's all good. What about my swing arm pivot? Make sure that's torqued. All that little stuff, I kind of don't like to rush it when putting a bike back together, because I want this bike to be back together right, where I'm not having to redo it. And I ride this bike, so I don't want it breaking when I'm on it. Thus, I kind of systematically go through this as I'm putting it back together. It does take me longer, but you know what? I don't like being broken down on the trail. So anyway, close, get stuff buttoned back up, fill in my coolant, and I should be able to do a test start on this. Woo! And see what she sounds like. And I thought I had more miles on this bike. I only have 1600? Yeah, whatever. 1600 miles. I have kill switch on. So that sounds very different during startup. Well, maybe that's just first startup. Sounds normal now, and it kicked right on as expected. Oh, what's that over there? What do we got over here? Something was dripping on the pipe. Maybe just oil. Maybe it was some coolant. Might have just been coolant. Start it back up. Sounds like my bike. Something keep an eye on anything that might be smoking, burning, leaking. So far, we're looking all right after putting things back together. That sounds more angry. I like it. And I would call that done. I'm going to recheck my coolant after running it because it flows through the system and might lower a bit. But at this point, it's just riding it. So to recap, if you're doing valves on one of these bikes, plan for a good bit of work and removing a good bit of stuff. Like you're going to take off your gas tank as normal, but I would also drain your coolant. Because like I showed, the only way I can really see how to get the valve cover out of here in the bike is out to the right side, which goes over those cooling lines. And it also looked like it was going to hit my cooling fan, so I just ended up removing that radiator as well. I did also take off my pipe here, and I don't think that's required, but I did it just to give myself a little more room in here. It might have been required. The way you have to tilt that valve cover out, it might have kind of hit that pipe, so it might have just been easier. I might have saved myself some time by removing it. But and you do have to disconnect all of the engine mount bolts as well as the swing arm bolt to get that engine to drop down about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. So it drops down just slightly in the frame, and then when you remove the water cooling stuff from this side and the injector, which the injector is right up under there, then you can pivot that cover out and get it out. So it is a good bit of work if you're going through this. The good news is those valves are all in spec. Honestly, if I didn't have cams, this is a 4,000 to 5,000 mile job for me. Like if you're heading near 5,000 miles over wintertime, hey, do some winter maintenance. But other than that, just believe and ride the damn things. I mean, they have such wide maintenance limits that they list in the manual. Screw it. Ride it. Send it. Have fun. I'm excited to try these, though. I'm hoping for about 3 to 4 more horsepower in my mid-range, which would be awesome. I'm riding around the mid-30s on this bike. That's about perfect. That's a good little trail bike. Anyway, long time getting this done, but hope everyone's having a great weekend and enjoy. Get out there, ride.